Welcome back, everyone. Mr. Talbot here for you again. We're going to continue on with developments in Europe, particularly in this Middle Ages time period. If you think back to our last video, we kind of looked at the early Middle Ages and what was going on before that with ancient Greece and Rome. And then we also finished up with some agriculture. So make sure we kind of have our notes out from our reading. We're going to add to those as we go along here. So we're going to kind of go into probably the best known time of the Middle Ages, which is going to be your High Middle Ages. So we're kind of still looking at, kind of the political fragmenting of what's going on. What we're going to see here is that over time, that decentralized system, it's going to start to get a little bit more centralized as we go on. But then this time period is really going to have a lot of religious divisions, particularly between the different sects of Christendom going on, things like the Crusades and Schism. We're going to get into that a lot more in our last video for Europe. So we're going to kind of start looking at some examples of what's going on kind of politically in Europe at this time. So one of the big years in Western civilization history that people that like to feel smart know is 1066. The last time Europe was kind of successfully invaded. And 1066 is when William the Conqueror, he's a Norse guy, so he's known as a Norman. He was kind of controlling this area of France called Normandy. There's a lot of Norse and Normandy going on there. That's because William is a Viking. He's descended from a Viking, which were also called Norse men. The Vikings they start in Scandinavia, and this is kind of from before the Middle Ages. They are going to basically come down from places like what is today Denmark and Scandinavia, Sweden, Finland, that kind of stuff. And they kind of sweep over, and they kind of start by raiding coasts and stuff. But eventually, they kind of decide to just stay and take over where they're at. And then they'll kind of become the new kind of rulers of their area. They build a lot of castles. The Vikings love them some castles, as will the Normans. And then they are going to also develop really good trading centers, which places like that will become like London, Dublin are all going to be Viking cities, as are a lot of them, all the way as far west as Spain. So that's kind of what's going on prior to this. And now William goes across and he basically conquers the various tribes of what is today England. And you can kind of see in the red here, the territory he will then claim. And you will notice that includes some of what is today France. And that is going to create a whole host of a mess, which we will get into in the late Middle Ages. But King William comes in, and over time, different kings keep making the bureaucracy a little bit bigger. Kind of like what we saw the Song Dynasty do in China. Only this is, a smaller territory, but the bureaucracy is getting bigger and bigger. They've got sheriffs and administrators, and they're loyal directly to the king. This is a big difference in a lot of feudalism where, that local county representative would be loyal to first his lord and then to the king. That meant that the king was kind of still dependent on that lord. This time, no, the king's got his own people. Now, there's still lords and dukes and all that kind of stuff, but the king has that bureaucracy is directly loyal to him. And that gives him a lot more control, a lot more centralized control. That's why he's able to rule a larger area than what we see going on in places like Italy and Germany at this time. So, like we said, though, a lot of these kings and lords in feudalism, they are the ones that actually have a lot of the money and stuff and a lot of the troops. So they kind of see this king getting a little bit more powerful than they're maybe comfortable with. So they kind of have this famous meeting. It's in 1215, and they're going to have the king agree to what becomes known as the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta pretty much means that there's going to be a parliament. There's going to be representative for the different lords. They're going to get a say in how things go, get to approve a lot of things. And then it's also going to be a big one that we kind of, as we study law, look back as establishing the rule of law. Even the king is going to be subject to the common law of the land. Now, there's an enforcement issue there, but it's a pretty nice idea. It's going to be very different than the idea we see of divine right, where kings are pretty much, gods on earth. They can do whatever they want. You're going to get a lot of different dates for when Parliament, as we know it today, kind of is established. Sometimes it's 1265, sometimes it's 1295. So somewhere in that range, our modern Parliament of Britain-ish is there. So you have your House of Lords, which is, your feudal lords, dukes and barons, that kind of thing. You have your House of Commons, and then Commons gives you the idea, it's like common everyday people. Not so much. This is going to be the wealthiest merchant kind of people, but these people don't have formal titles. They're not from the nobility. but still very influential. And they get a say in how the government in England is going. So this is kind of a finally, we've had, gosh, it's been about 1,000 years since, the Roman Republic, and we're starting to see some of those ideas finally come back in Western Europe. So that's kind of the high Middle Ages are kind of nice. We see some great Gothic architecture and really cool stuff in that time period. Then there's the late Middle Ages, which if there's one thing it could be associated with, it's lots and lots and lots of people dying. Now, from a Western Christian European standpoint, certainly from how the Catholic Church felt, one of the high points of the late Middle Ages is that Spain, which was kind of becoming part of Dar el-Islam with the Moors, who are the Muslims controlling most of Spain, they're kind of, those Muslims are going to be pushed out, and Spain is going to be retaken by some Christian kingdoms. So that's kind of the high point of a lot of these Christian kingdoms in the Middle Ages. The downside is a lot of people are going to die. We have this thing called the Little Ice Age, which is kind of naturally the climate of the Europe is going to cool, which that makes farming harder. So you got less food. That's not great. You've got people then, because they can't make money agriculturally, are going to move to the city looking for more economic opportunity. So we're getting more crowded cities. Unlike what we'll see going on with those great American civilizations, European cities were disgusting. There was sewage on the ground. There's not enough fresh water. People are malnourished, and you get a lot of famine and disease coming in. So you're going to see huge spikes in death. This is kind of shows you just how much the temperature cooled. And so that's going to, it's only a few degrees, but it's enough to make it less productive farming. Things are going to freeze more. So that's bad. So if, the disease and malnourished isn't killing enough people, well, the Europeans are like, let's make this suck a little bit more. So let's have a 100-year war, which doesn't actually last 100 years, lasts a little longer. And it's between France and Britain. If we think back to our map of the Normans, where the King of England was claiming that he owned part of what is today France and England, that leads to some tension. And basically, big war takes place, on and off again, fighting. And a teenage female ends up convincing a lot of people that she has heard messages from God and that she should lead the French army and she will lift a siege, and she does it. And it's kind of an incredible story. That's Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc is an incredible story, and we will kind of probably look at that in a little more details because it's such a cool story. She's the exception, though. Most women were not going to get to strap on armor and go and fight and be, awesome. A lot of women are facing really bad times in the late Middle Ages. Things such as you're going to have the feudal titles. They're always going to prefer the male over the female. This is going to be a big problem in England when we get to Henry VIII. Okay, common women, if they were starting to do things really like basket making and weaving and leather tanning, all sorts of stuff, as that became more and more profitable, the men came in and said, yeah, women, we know you've made these really successful guilds and everything that are doing an awesome job, making lots of money. We'd rather have that money, so you can't do this job anymore. It has to be a man doing the job. So some women then are going to say, well, forget this, especially that you're poor. They're going to say instead, I'm just going to go into a monastery. I'm going to become a nun. And it's because they got more freedom in the Catholic Church. Unfortunately, the Catholic Church is kind of like, no, you know what, women, you still can't be priests. And you still need to listen to what the men are saying. So even pretty much every area a woman was becoming successful in the late Middle Ages, the men came in and kind of took it back over. Yeah. The last little thing we're going to talk about is the Renaissance. This is kind of the coming out of the Middle Ages. So if you think about it, about half of Europe's population, some people think, was wiped out by the plague. Well, all those economic resources, ships, gold, land, the things you need to make money, that's all still available. And there's only half the people now. So that really opens up a lot of economic opportunity for people that didn't have before. So we're going to see a middle class getting a little bit bigger. These ideas now, people are still in cities. So now that you have people in cities, you're going to see that they're able to share those ideas. And so we see people becoming less connected to the church. There was kind of a resistance to the church after the plague. People weren't feeling great about it. So they turn to science more. And so now your loyalty is not so much to the church, it's more to your nation, to your kingdom. So nationalism is going to rise. And this is all part of the Renaissance, in addition to the famous artwork that we often associate with the Renaissance. We'll finish up with religion in our last video on Europe.